Of the rest, the least susceptible divided into two. Most were 4 birds, some 8. All were returned to the incubator. Buds began to develop. Then, after 2 days, were suddenly chilled and checked.
These, he waved his hand, are the incubators. And opening an insulated door, he showed them racks upon racks of numbered test tubes. The week's supply of ova, kept, he explained, at blood heat, whereas the male gametes, and here he opened another door, they have to be kept at 35 instead of 37. Full blood heat sterilizes. Rams wrapped in peronogene beget no lambs. Still leaning against the incubators, he gave them, while the pencils scurried illegibly across the pages, a brief description of the modern fertilizing process. Spoke first, of course, of its surgical introduction. The operation undergone voluntarily for the good of society, not to mention the fact that it carries a bonus amounting to 6 months' salary. Continued with some account of the technique for preserving the excised ovary alive and actively developing. Passed on to a consideration of optimum temperature, salinity, viscosity. Referred to the liquor in which the detached and ripened eggs were kept, and, leading his charges to the work tables, actually showed them how this liquor was drawn off from the test tubes, how it was let out drop by drop onto the specially warmed slides over microscopes, how the eggs which it contained were inspected for abnormalities, counted and transferred to a porous receptacle, how, and he now took them to watch the operation, this receptacle was immersed in a warm bouillon containing free-swimming spermatozoa, at a minimum concentration of 100,000 per cubic centimeter, he insisted, and how, after 10 minutes, the container was lifted out of the liquor and its contents re-examined. How, if any of the eggs remained unfertilized, it was again immersed, and if necessary, yet again. How the fertilized ova went back to the incubators, where the alphas and betas remained until definitely bottled, while the gammas, deltas, and epsilons were brought out again, after only 36 hours, to undergo Bokanovsky's process. Bokanovsky's process, repeated the director, and the students underlined the words in their little notebooks. 1 egg, 1 embryo, 1 adult. Normality. But a Bokanovskified egg will bud, will proliferate, will divide. From 8 to 96 buds, and every bud will grow into a perfectly formed embryo, and every embryo into a full-sized adult, making 96 human beings grow where only one grew before. Progress. Essentially, the DHC concluded, Bokanovskification consists of a series of arrests of development. You check the normal growth, and paradoxically enough, the egg responds by budding. Responds by budding. The pencils were busy. He pointed. On a very slowly moving band, a rack full of test tubes was entering a large metal box. Another rack full was emerging. Machinery faintly purred. It took 8 minutes for the tubes to go through, he told them. 8 minutes of hard X-rays being about as much as an egg can stand. A few died. Of the rest, the least susceptible divided into 2. Most put out 4 buds, some 8. All were returned to the incubators, where the buds began to develop. Then, after 2 days, were suddenly chilled and checked. 2, 4, 8, the buds in their turn budded, and having budded were dosed almost to death with alcohol. Consequently burgeoned again, and having budded, bud, were thereafter, further arrest being generally fatal, left to develop in peace. By which time the original egg was in a fair way to becoming anything from 8 to 96 embryos. A prodigious improvement, you will agree, on nature. Identical twins, but not in piddling 2s and 3s, as in the old viviparous days, when an egg would sometimes accidentally divide, Actually, by dozens, by scores at a time. Scores, the director repeated, and flung out his arms, as though he were distributing largesse. Scores! But one of the students was fool enough to ask where the advantage lay. My good boy! The director wheeled sharply round on him. Can't you see? Can't you see? He raised a hand. His expression was solemn. Bokanovsky's process is one of the major instruments of social stability. Major instruments of social stability. Standard men and women, in uniform batches. The whole of a small factory staffed with the products of a single Bokanovskified egg. 96 identical twins working 96 identical machines. The voice was almost tremulous with enthusiasm. You really know where you are. For the first time in history, he quoted the planetary motto, community, identity, stability. Grand words. If we could Bokanovskify indefinitely, the whole problem would be solved. Solved by standard gammas, unvarying deltas, uniform epsilon. Millions of identical twins. The principle of mass production at last applied to biology. But alas, the director shook his head, we can't Bokanovskify indefinitely. 96 seemed to be the limit. 72 a good average. From the same ovary, and with gametes of the same male, to manufacture as many batches of identical twins as possible. That was the best, sadly a second best, that they could do. And even that was difficult. For in nature it takes 30 years for 200 eggs to reach maturity. But our business is to stabilize the population at this moment, here and now. Dribbling out twins over a quarter of a century, what would be the use of that? Obviously, no use at all. But Podsnap's technique had immensely accelerated the process of ripening. They could make sure of at least 150 mature eggs within 2 years. Fertilize and Bokanovskify. In other words, multiply by 72. And you get an average of nearly 11,000 brothers and sisters in 150 batches of identical twins, all within 2 years of the same age. And in exceptional cases, we can make one ovary yield us over 15,000 adult individuals. Beckoning to a fair-haired, ruddy young man who happened to be passing at the moment, Mr. Foster, he called. The ruddy young man approached. Can you tell us the record for a single ovary, Mr. Foster? 16,012 in this center, Mr. Foster replied without hesitation. He spoke very quickly, had a vivacious blue eye, and took an evident pleasure in quoting figures. 16,012 in 189 batches of identicals. But of course they've done much better, he rattled on, in some of the tropical centers. Singapore has often produced over 16,500, and Mombasa has actually touched the 17,000 mark. But then they have unfair advantages. You should see the way a Negro ovary responds to pituitary. It's quite astonishing when you are used to working with European material. Still, he added with a laugh, but the light of combat was in his eyes and the lift of his chin was challenging. Still, we mean to beat them if we can. I'm working on a wonderful Delta Minus ovary at this moment, only just 18 months old. Over 12,700 children already, either decanted or in embryo, and still going strong. We'll beat them yet. That's the spirit I like, cried the director, and clapped Mr. Foster on the shoulder. Come along with us and give these boys the benefit of your expert knowledge. Mr. Foster smiled modestly. With pleasure. They went.